Okay, we'll go right into the next one. Kim Weisensee Brown, Central Human.
And then should I just stay here for
Yes.
that? Awesome. Thank you so much. Hey, how's everyone doing? Good? Good. If you need to stand up and take a stretch break or anything, feel free. You don't have to stay in your seats if you need to just get up and move around a little bit. So my name is Kim Weisensee Brown, and I'm here to talk about diversity in data. And my story is a little bit different and unique, and I think as we think about this concept of diversity, and you think about diversity and inclusion, it's a loaded word, and it has different definitions depending on the angle and the context that you're thinking about it. But the criticality now more than ever is so important that I'm really happy that the event took time to really bring in speakers to focus on this topic. So what I'm going to be talking about isn't necessarily about deep technical information that you've seen in other conversations and talks today. I was actually just at Blended Revolution, which was really interesting, and definitely had grabbed some visuals. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and what we're doing in Chicago to help increase the diversity within the space, which really does drive better innovation, better business results. So I actually started out my career as a journalist. So I had a really interesting background and actually got into the digital space because I was working at a magazine at a time when these websites were coming up and no one knew what to do with them, and so they just kind of stuck someone on it and said, hey, figure out the website. And that to me was this incredible introduction as a journalist into not only data, but how Google works, how search engines work, the meaning of algorithms, and that idea of findability. And I also found, as I moved from journalism into marketing and data, that my perspective was really unique the way I looked at the world. And I became an asset on teams because I looked at things a different way. And for me, that became this really interesting bellwether because I was able to solve problems that no one else had solved, not because I knew something someone didn't know, because I was different. I had a different experience. I came up from absolutely a working class background. I had multiple jobs growing up. I worked my way through college. I had my own experiences as a female, as a journalist, as someone that's a little more creative than technical. So for me coming into a situation, I was able to identify different dots to connect, problem solve in unique ways. And it became this really interesting perspective on who am I coming into this data space? What makes me valuable and unique? And looking around and realizing that wasn't necessarily the case for everybody, and there wasn't a clear path or value on that. And so one of good friends of mine was actually traveling around California and met a bunch of women doing this women in big data thing. Called me up and said, hey, the West Coast is doing this. It's incredible. The turnout's amazing. We need this in Chicago. Just started a meetup group, Chicago Women in Big Data. Now we have over 800 members. And I bring this up because it talks about a couple different things. So when we think about diversity and inclusion in big data, one, and this stat is definitely going to be outdated, it's from 2016, about 25% of people in the industry are female. And that number drops significantly as you go into women of color. And that's not to say that women aren't interested, because the stat's higher for science and engineering. And it's not to say that women were involved when it peaked in like 1991 at 36%, and women became less interested. So when we started this group and I started talking to a lot of women and men, a lot of the women said, I love this. I don't see myself in the room all the time when I walk in, and I appreciate this group because I'm seeing myself and being able to network with people in different ways. So thank you, keep it going. The other thing I noticed when I went to conferences, as I got into the space, was that the people on stage didn't reflect the people in the room. And we've all seen this. You're on teams, and the makeup of the team doesn't reflect the makeup of the management. The people on stage don't reflect the people in the room, don't reflect the people in the company doing the work. And so for me as a professional, I saw enough bad speakers that I finally said, well, if that's what if that's what it takes to get on stage, then I can do it too. And as I started Women in Big Data with this focus on driving diversity in data, I realized that there are so many women doing incredible work. We don't need to create diversity because it's already innately there. Maybe not as much as we want, but there are incredible people doing incredible work. How do we get them on stage? How do we get more women and men in the audience getting more used to seeing a woman on stage, someone that doesn't look like them, still doing incredible work, telling their stories, the different ways that they are creatively solving problems based on their unique experience. And so that's another thing we developed as we're thinking about diversity, is how to get more women on stage, telling their case studies, because one, that's celebrating work that's already being done. Two, it gives everyone else new ideas to be creative, right? If I'm in a room and I think of a creative idea and help someone else think outside the box, imagine how that exponentially increases when there's someone on stage telling a unique aspect to a conversation and sharing that with a large audience. And the third thing that's really important is that this isn't a women-only issue. Because we live in a world with lots of different people, there are men and women in this audience, and I have a lot of men continually asking me, how do I help? How do I get involved? What can I do? I think it's really interesting because as a white woman, I continually have the conversations with women of color to say, what? I don't know that experience. That's not my experience, but what can I do to be supportive? What can I do to help? Right? There was a really interesting analogy that someone gave me. It's like being in a friend's kitchen. You feel like you're always kind of, I don't know where you keep your silverware. I don't know how you want to run your kitchen. Just let me know how I can help. We have those same conversations with people that aren't like us. How can I help? How can I be of service? Men have the same conversation with me. I'm not a woman, but I want to be involved in a solution. How can I help? And what we've tried to do is create conversations and methodologies and systems so that men in the industry can say, I understand how I can be of service. I understand how I can help and be a part of this conversation. There's no rule. There's no right and wrong way. So how do we create an environment where men feel comfortable raising their hand and saying, I don't know what to do, but I want to be a part of it and I want to be a value add. And so creating those systems, having those conversations, feeling what works and doesn't work, and doing it together. Because collectively, the more diversity we have in this industry, the better off we all are. So Chicago Women in Big Data was started specifically to focus on bringing to light the diversity in the industry, the successes of that, and what people are doing today that are incredible, right? We're not trying to create success, there is success already, and then grow it. Grow it by connecting women to people like themselves when they're in environments that maybe they don't see themselves in as much, and then bringing men to the table who want to mentor and be a part of that. So there's incredible things that women are doing in Chicago today. We've got Bike Lane Uprising here, which was a woman who just wanted to solve a problem and figured it out. We have a conversation with a woman at Facebook who is learning how to do her own speaking and presentations. I'm going to be talking about how she's thinking about measurement when it comes to social networking. We've had speakers on who have written books on Spark and different Apache products because the book didn't exist for them in a way that they understood it, so they started writing their own Cliff Notes. Right? So there's some really cool things that women are doing today as part of these teams. We're actually talking with a woman at GoGo who just loves the work that she does and wants to get involved with other people, women and men, taking those day-to-day challenges and really doing something that feels like they're changing the world. So in Chicago, we've got this incredible amount of work and support and community, but how do we start moving those numbers? How do we start moving those metrics? How do we start growing the diversity and inclusion in the industry? Right? I think in the last conversation we just heard, it's one thing to be diverse, it's another thing to really feel like you're a part of the team and playing along with everybody else. And then the other reason is why. Why does it matter? Diversity for the sake of diversity doesn't mean anything. I work in business. So at the end of the day, there's altruism, but there's also numbers. And so how is this actually going to drive business forward? So 2 parts that I'll touch on really quickly. One is what we're doing to drive that diversity, drive those numbers forward. There's a lot of groups in Chicago that are incredibly active. The female founders of different companies like Jellyvision have started really intentionally making the circuit, that idea of being on stage, making sure that they're being seen, connecting with groups like Women in Technology. But the other thing that's happening is there's actually this really powerful force of women behind the scenes. So there's lots of councils, there's lots of government work. Women are in some incredible leadership positions, and they're starting to take notice and say, even though my job might be policy, I am a technologist, and I am a data person. I have to be, because everything we do involves data and technology. And so this idea of developing allies in the space is starting to grow. So if I talk with people that I know at different government councils or government groups, women and men in those organizations are saying, hey, I'm starting to think about data and technology to make sure that I'm plugged in and I understand who's working in the field and how to really connect those dots and bring it together. So it's not just a women in technology group thinking about women in technology. We're getting all these other industries and leaders saying, and as you all know, everything is data. Everything is technology. Everything is involving this. And so people are starting to finally understand and becoming mature enough in their understanding to say, I need to be a part of this conversation. What we're doing in Women in Big Data is making sure that women who aren't founders of companies, aren't CEOs, don't have a speaker's rep, or aren't necessarily on the circuit, start building that up. I am a huge fan of celebrating the minutiae in life. And as you all know, little tweaks and what I call iterative innovation is going to be the future. We're not going to develop some next landmark idea that's going to change the game, right? 5G is just an iteration on something that's already existed. All our networking systems are just improving on things that we already have. So everything that individuals are working on today are these iterative innovations that are going to change the world. To get on stage, you need a speaker's resume. You need a speaker's profile. And so now what we're trying to do is get women on stages to get a video of themselves so they can be invited to that next conference. And not talk about the fact that they're women, but just talk about the great work that they're doing. There's this really interesting dynamic of why don't I see myself on stage? It's just a function of maybe you weren't asked before, or you didn't feel confident enough before, so you didn't go and do one talk. You didn't record yourself, so you didn't have it on your LinkedIn profile. The event sponsor didn't know to ask you, and so you didn't get invited. And it's this really interesting cycle that happens, and it becomes unintentional. And it's not that anyone's doing it on purpose, it's just a system that's in place. And so to disrupt the system, we're doing one thing. We're getting women a speaker's resume. And so when you go to a conference, you have the right to see the best and the brightest, regardless of their gender or color. So how do we make sure that the best and the brightest have the credentials to get on stage? Whether that's the day-to-day work where they develop something small that had iterative innovation, or if they're inventing something brand new. We want more people on stage that reflect the diversity in our actual companies and in our actual teams. The other thing we're doing is helping women connect and network so they stay plugged in and engaged as they move through these corporate environments. Whether they want to go off and start their own company, have a passion project, or stay and get promoted, we see significant drop-off in the data space on that. And so how do we get women connected as innately connected individuals, right, who want that teamwork and that camaraderie in different ways? So even if they don't have the support of their teams, they feel supported as they go on in their careers, and there's less likelihood that they're going to drop out because they're not happy with their environment. And the question of why does all of this matter? Well, as an individual and as a citizen of the world, as we start to get into artificial intelligence, I absolutely want the people that reflect my world in the room building it. Whether you're a man or a woman of any color, if that group of data scientists and engineers and technologists doesn't reflect the world that that product or that decision is going to be into, we've got a massive problem. So it's in our best interest to demand that regardless of the skill set, we've got people in the room having those conversations, and teams diverse as the audience that they're going to be speaking with. Because that's literally where we're at today. We are building a world that can either mirror the world that we live in or deviate significantly to whether you want to call it a conscious or unconscious bias of the product that's going to come out. We are all invested in the diversity in the big data space and the data science space for that reason alone. Income, background, where you were born, the family dynamic that you lived in, your relationships, all of that is diversity. If you grew up poor, you are going to think of the world so differently than someone that grew up rich. You're going to have different concerns. You're going to look at the world differently. You're going to have different problem-solving skills. You're going to have different fears. If you grew up in a small town, you're going to have a different perspective on the world than if you grew up in an urban area. If you grew up in Europe, where a train trip away you were hearing hundreds of languages, versus Australia, where you are your own country, and there's this idea of quick trips isn't as easy, but you're globe-trotting potentially. All of that shapes the world that we live in. So it's really important that our teams reflect that. The other thing we'll talk about with diversity and inclusion is the diversity of skills and backgrounds. My background is a journalist. I'm always going to be a journalist first. I believe in helping people find what they're looking for and getting the information accurately in a lot of different ways. I will talk to you in any way, shape, or form to get my point across versus say it once and hope that you got it. I'm a communicator and a journalist at heart. When we're thinking about data, even if you can't code a program, I want someone with a background in ethics on that team. And philosophy, right? I want the arts and science. I want the arts to come back to the sciences. We think about a lot of young people going to trade schools. It's great to have a skill. I learned Python. I love it. It changed the way my brain works. But we also need to understand the soft skills. We also need people who've gone back and read, the Greek writings. We also need to understand why Latin is a core derivative of a lot of the languages that we have. We need someone to think about ethics and understand why, socialism so easily corrupts into communism, and why all these different political systems in place have been tested and tried over time. We need to understand how brains work and how people respond to things and those innate emotional attributes. If you look at the way the digital assistants came up and that email voice, I don't think it was done intentionally. I think it was done because we didn't have a diverse enough team to say, not what voice to use, but why don't we just code for two voices? Or what they're doing now is they're trying to find that middle voice where depending on the context and how you approach the world, you either interpret it as female or male. That's not that hard to develop up front, but it wasn't done because people didn't think about it, because they just brought their experience to the table. And yet now it's actually shaping a generation of young people into believing that, that female names or female voices are assistants. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that a really simple decision in a room somewhere, in an office in someone else's state, or in a different part of the country, is now shaping an experience of an entire global generation of what a norm is. So when we think about data and diversity and inclusion, it's taking on a very powerful meaning. And I'm glad we have examples of the digital assistants to look back on and say how profound the changes are. But my call to action is, this is all of our jobs. And it's not because it's the right thing to do. And it's not because, you heard a talk and you want to be involved in the diversity and inclusion conversation. It's because it's literally going to help build right products and sell them. I'm going to be more apt to buy a product that allows me to adjust the voice and tonality to my desire and change the name than I am not. How do we get our teams to reflect the world that we live in so we're selling products to the full audience possible? There are a lot of female inventors that aren't getting funding because the VCs are predominantly male and they don't get the product. That's fine. It's not for them. So what do? Well, those VCs can get more involved in market economics and understand that there's a viable audience out there with a lot of money to buy. We can also get more women working in VCs or connected into angel organizations. But the reality is, diversity sells. The more diverse we have on the teams, the better our products are, the more we can compete in the marketplace. The more diversity we have on stages, the more people in the audience see themselves, whether it's on a YouTube video or in the audience itself, the more likelihood they are to go to school and to ask to get that job and to stay in and be more productive. So this isn't really a conversation about what's good and what's right, it's about what makes sense for our world. Diversity drives business, it drives better products, it drives higher employee engagement, it makes people feel more fulfilled with each other, it drives creativeness, and we've got to tackle it from a lot of different angles. So from my point of view and from what I can control, with my company and my work, I always try to be really intentional about not diversity for the sake of diversity, but does my team reflect the audience that I sell to? Because if it doesn't, there's no way I can do my job well. You need diversity in ages, because everyone brings that perspective. You need diversity in background and color and lifestyle, because it helps you get that full breadth of market opportunity. And so starting Women in Big Data in Chicago was really good for me, because it was my way of saying, I want to see more women on stage speaking so we can see the great stories that are already out there. And let's get those women connected, and let's get men in that conversation so they know that they can be a part of this and feel productive in a topic that's really challenging as a man, I imagine. Right? How do you raise your hand and be included when it's not your experience? So really creating those safe spaces for men to be involved, to celebrate women, and helping women get on stage to learn how to celebrate their successes. That's the work that I'm doing. And the work I encourage everyone else to do is really look at diversity and inclusion as a way to be iteratively innovative. And kind of tapping into that competitive spirit, right? The more people you have on the team, the smarter the ideas, the more challenging we are, the more excited we get to work together, the less likelihood that you're going to create a clique, the less likely that you're going to have someone not feel included and want to leave, so you lose that productivity. And the more likely that you're going to build a product and an experience and a service that's not only going to respond to the customers or the goal that you're trying to achieve today, but create that competitive advantage to see an opportunity in the future. It takes women and our unique experiences to identify a need in the marketplace that men and women might not understand, and vice versa. We want to work together. We want those experiences. And especially as we move forward today, as we get into advanced machine learning and true AI, it is critical now more than ever that we have the diversity in the room, because this virtual world we're creating has to look like our world today. And if it doesn't, we're all going to feel very uncomfortable and not know why, and it's going to be hard to unwind. So my call to you all is take it as something for your own, to continue to ask young people whether they're interested in coding, or they want to go to school and do something in philosophy or ethics or some of the arts, to find their way to get involved in the data space and raise their hand and say, I have a place, I want to be a part of this experience, and I have a unique value add to be a diverse person on this team. And that truly will drive market competitiveness and a better world. Thank you. And I think we might have a few minutes for questions, or no?
Time.
You got time?
Yes.
Awesome. Any questions? Yeah.
As you built your community in Chicago, what things did you do to specifically bring women into the fold and let them know about this thing? So, like, what marketing, I guess, was unique to what you did, or
Yeah.
did you specifically think about who you were attracting and how you did it?
Yeah, really good question. And by the way, ChicagoWomenInBigData.com. So if anyone wants to join Men or Women, check it out. We're still building it up. But that's the website of the group. So it's really funny, because as a marketer, I did everything wrong, because I truly thought it would be a lot more work than it was. And I think that's what's really interesting. I put it online, and I immediately had more people sign up than I knew what to do with. Which is interesting because it hit on a zeitgeist that I didn't really believe, because I work in a lot of different spaces. But what I heard was that women were craving something like this. That they go to these events, and if it's, an R event where it's all coding, they'll walk in the room and they'll be the only woman. But if it's, a women's networking event, they'll walk in the room, it'll be all women. But there was no in between. There was no space for women to actually just be involved in a room that was about their craft. And so this really is based on the practicality of celebrating women on stage, or like women sharing their stories, but not necessarily just female empowerment or women-only space. So I didn't have to do a lot of marketing for it. And then the engagement piece, I do a lot of heavy lifting. So it's kind of funny. It's like old school meets new school. A lot of it is through networking and sharing, and just a lot of like digital technology and email lists and getting the word out. And the other half of it is very one-to-one networking. So I pick up the phone and I say, I want you, and you have the right to be here, and you have a really cool story to tell, and you should come. I found that it almost takes that personal connection, because we live in such a data-driven space and everything is so virtual. People feel hidden or nervous to walk into a physical space, and so it's been this combination of traditional marketing, social media, all that stuff, combined with very, like, I want you to meet my friend, I think she's really smart, pick up the phone, talk to them, invite them personally, and follow up. Yeah, did that answer your question? But I'm always actually looking for new ideas, because it's one thing to say you're interested, and it's another thing to get people to show up. Yeah.
I just want to validate with +1 on the personal outreach. Is, someone and you think that they'd be good, don't wait for them to sign up, follow them, and to be powerful, and to be like, I think you'd be great at this, or let me introduce you to this person, or ask them to do a very specific thing. Like, I think you should talk about the specific thing that you really know.
Yeah.
That kick in the pants gets a lot of people.
Yeah. Here's what's interesting, and I have no data to back this up. Let's look at, in the 80s, women still had a separate classified section. In the 1980s. So just wrap your head around how recent intentional segregation has been for gender. So men were really good and trained by the older men in their lives and within the systems to do that intentional outreach, because they were the ones in these business spaces. So they knew how to say, you, I'm gonna mentor you, I'm gonna invite you to lunch, there's like an art to that, right? That's a thing. Women were not involved in those spaces for a long time. And so we don't know that innately. It's not like our mothers were involved in that to know it. So that one-to-one outreach, not only is it really powerful, but I think that's something that men and women can do for each other, because we're teaching a whole group of our population something that it is within a generation, right? Like, it hasn't really been brought down for a while because women were intentionally left out of job opportunities in these settings. So I think that one-to-one outreach is the best practice in the business setting, and doing it with women is really powerful because it's not the way we were brought up or trained. I was born in the 80s. In the 80s, there was a separate classified section where women were left out of things. So that one-to-one is a good way to like bring people in, but just be mindful that what seems common sense to one person doesn't necessarily mean it translates to the other. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, it's a lot of extra work we have to do in a good way, and I think a lot of men need it too. I think there are so many great men that don't get that extra help either, that don't make it into those upper echelons. And I want to see good, smart people that take care of each other there versus the ones who are really good at just getting ahead. And so I don't really look at this as just a women's issue. I look at this as, how do we get the good people? How do we get the good people together and the good, smart people together, bring us all up and more involved, and really crowdsource that engagement instead of waiting for someone else?
So the frustration that I have is you and Michael both presented really well on why diversity matters. But the frustration I had at these events is the room is full of people that already agree with you.
Yeah.
How do you get that message in front of people who don't agree?
Yes, really good question. A couple different things. There's HR teams. So I'm involved in HR groups. Actually, if you're interested in that, there's a group called Hacking HR, which is phenomenal. I know the founders on the East Coast, but they've got chapters everywhere. And Hacking HR is a group of HR professionals that identify exactly that. And the system in HR is essentially broken down into just like how to legally not get sued, but it should be exactly what you just brought up. How do we get smart people in the room? How do we retain great talent? How do we actually push this diversification? So Hacking HR is one of the areas that I'm involved in to help empower and help HR professionals who don't know what to do, but they just know that it needs to change, or great HR professionals that are starting to socialize and network best practices, right? Why do you need a master's degree for certain jobs? You don't. Maybe you don't. Honestly, do you need a bachelor's anymore? Or can trade schools and certification programs be enough? That's an HR decision. I mean, it's a hiring manager decision, but it's also an HR thing. And so I think there's looking at those tangential industries and how do you empower HR groups. I mean, Hacking HR is definitely one I would recommend. The other one is just peer pressure. So doing an event about this and then inviting leadership teams, and if those leadership teams are all white males, it kind of looks around and hopefully they have some specific, some sense of awareness. And the third is a conversation that a lot of people are having about what does it mean to opt out and what does it mean to change the rules of the game. You know, does a woman leaving the workforce to start her own company mean she's opting out because she doesn't want to play that game anymore and doesn't want to be an executive at like GE, for example, and so she started her own business? I don't know. Is that opting out? I don't know. I want more female CEOs. I want more women of color and men of color on executive boards and advisors. But I also know that the rules of the game are rigged, and it was built for a system from the 1950s. And do you play the game and hope to win it, or do you change the game and change the rules? And so I don't have an answer for you there, but I think that's the third thing that I look at and think about is not how do we kind of push this gig economy where people just work really hard and don't feel fulfilled or make money, but how do we empower people to say, am I going to try to fight the system from the inside, or do I make a new system? Do I try to push and diversify this team, or do I make a new one? And is that my area of disruption? And is that my market competitiveness? And so for me as a marketer, I hope there's diverse teams that understand in a highly commoditized marketplace. How do you stand out? You push the diversity of your team. People buy on emotional decision making. And so if you have a commoditized product and you're going apples to apples with somebody else, but you actually have a great team and a great culture, market the hell out of it. Because as consumers now, we're buying on that emotional decision making and that belief system more than beyond just product. And so stories like that help give the decision makers who are primarily market and money based more financial incentive. Does that answer your question? Yeah. It's tough, it is. It's preaching to the choir. I believe in market dynamics and I believe in voting with your wallet. And I think it also makes people empowered in this room. It's kind of like the one, does my vote count? I don't use Uber. I just can't. And if that's my $1, then that's my $1. And I have that conversation with people. Is that going to make an impact? I don't know. But I think as individuals, if we start making those intentional choices, that can create change. And I apologize if there's any Uber folks in the room. Or in the live stream. You guys are maybe the changes, but. Any other questions? If you want to do some, go ahead.
Do you have any tricks to get people to see what you're getting at? You're arguing with you about why should they care about this?
Oh, That's a good question. In a workplace setting or I primarily try to go with money, depending on the audience. So if it's like a leadership, just say, hey, this is gonna, like kind of the argument, you know, I want to know the psychology of that buyer. And we're not getting opportunity because we're not getting that mindset, because we don't have that on our team. Do you want to share an example with me just so I can be more specific to you? It becomes really, go ahead, yeah.
I mean, it happens. People like talk about how you shouldn't have to do this. You shouldn't have to make an extra effort.
Oh,
Because, you know, people will do the right thing in time. But, you know, sometimes it's frustrating to try to get the message across that it doesn't have to be.
yeah, okay, so on that point, what I found is, and this is relatively new, but I think about like marriage and relationships. There's absolutely nothing in our world that happens automatically that's a good habit. Habits don't, habits are incredibly intentional, we work at them. Exercise, right? Personal habits, relationships. If you don't intentionally put your friendships and your marriage first and make time for them, they just won't magically show up at your door, right? So that's the argument I've started using with people. It's actually very, the things that we care about the most important things are incredibly intentional, and there's nothing else in someone's life that they aren't putting time and effort towards. And so that's how I started going back and saying, not only do we have to, but we should and we should want to. Yeah. Did you have a question or an answer for him? Are you sure? Well, if you're interested, so Chicago Women in Big Data.com, we have an event at Facebook in 2 weeks. Definitely sign up. You can go to our calendar and sign up even if you're not a member. And support an incredibly smart woman from Facebook talking about some great work they're doing on measurement. Thank you so much. Enjoy the day. Thank you. I don't know how to turn it off.
We're going to take about 3 minutes.